My name is Maya Torres. I was 30 years old the day my mother chose my brother's ribbon-cutting ceremony over my bar admission. I remember exactly where I was standing when I found out. In the marble-floored lobby of the Colorado State Judicial Building, still in my black blazer and heels, holding my newly signed certificate of admission to the bar in both hands, like something I was afraid to drop. My phone buzzed. I assumed it was my parents finally texting to say they were stuck in traffic, maybe 5 minutes away, maybe sorry. Instead, it was a photo. My brother grinning in front of a shiny new storefront, gold scissors in his hand, a fat red ribbon stretched across the door. My mother on one side of him, my father on the other. Everyone laughing. The caption read, "New chapter for Lux Nail and Spa. So proud of you, Daniel. This family is unstoppable." I stared at the picture until the marble floor seemed to tilt under my feet. Before I tell you what happened after that day, and how one case file on my computer screen changed everything my family thought they had built, tell me what time is it, where you are right now, and what are you doing while you listen? I want to know how far this story has traveled from the building where I stood holding a piece of paper that proved I had finally become exactly who I fought to become, completely alone. If you've ever been the invisible one in a family that had a designated star, you already know how normal it becomes to expect nothing. By the time I was standing in that lobby, I had been practicing low expectations for most of my life. My parents immigrated from Mexico when I was 3 and built everything they had from a single nail salon in Phoenix. By the time I was in high school, they had 4 locations under the name Lux Nail and Spa. By the time I graduated college, they had 7. My brother Daniel managed the expansion. He was charming and loud, and he had the kind of face people wanted to trust. My parents treated his every business idea like a prophecy. I was the one who got a full scholarship to law school. I was the one who volunteered on environmental litigation cases during my second year and stayed at the office until midnight reading through compliance files that everyone else found too dry to touch. My parents understood lawyer in the abstract, but they understood ribbon cuttings in their bones. When I called to tell them I had passed the bar on my first attempt, my mother said, "That's wonderful, Mija. Can you help Daniel review some lease agreements? His new attorney charges too much." So, no. The ribbon-cutting photo was not a surprise. It was just the first time I could not find the energy to pretend it was fine. I made one phone call. "Mom." I kept my voice flat because if I let any feeling into it, I would fall apart in the lobby of a state judicial building in front of strangers, and I had promised myself I would never do that again. "You knew my admission was today at 2 o'clock. You've known for 6 weeks. There was background noise, a drill, someone laughing, the tinny pop of a champagne bottle. "Of course we knew," she said, distracted. "But Daniel needed us here for the opening. You know how much he's been stressed about this new location. You can celebrate with your friends tonight. You're always so good at handling things on your own." "That's not a compliment," I said. "Don't be like that." Her voice dipped into the patient, slightly tired tone she reserved for conversations she considered unnecessary. "Your father wants to say something." There was shuffling, and then my father's voice, rougher, already halfway out of the conversation. "We'll take you to dinner this weekend, Mija. You know we're proud of you. This is just bad timing." I looked at the certificate in my hands. 7 years of school, $100,000 in loans. 3 years of nights and weekends that other people my age spent at bars and on vacations. And the people who were supposed to be front row were 40 minutes away at a ribbon cutting where they had been available, without question, for days. "Okay," I said. "I'll talk to you later." I hung up. I stood in the lobby for another full minute. Then I walked outside into the Denver afternoon, sat on the steps of the building with my certificate across my knees, and let myself cry exactly once, quietly and completely, before I put on my sunglasses and went to dinner by myself. I ordered the best steak on the menu and a glass of wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries. I told the waiter it was my birthday, which was not true, but felt close enough to some kind of occasion. He brought me a small dessert with a candle and sang to me, and I laughed until my eyes watered again, and that time it did not feel like grief. The move to Denver had been my plan for 2 years. Phoenix felt too close to the story I was trying to rewrite. I had accepted an associate position at a mid-size environmental law firm called Westridge Legal Group, a team of about 15 attorneys that did mostly regulatory compliance and enforcement work for corporate clients, and occasionally took on cases referred from state environmental agencies. My specialty was chemical waste compliance. Solvents, industrial runoff, contamination from commercial operations. The kind of violations that look boring on paper and turn devastating in the real world. I liked the work because it was precise and it mattered. There was no gray zone in environmental compliance. Either you followed the protocols or you did not. Either the groundwater tested clean or it did not. I had spent my entire life in a family where the rules bent depending on who was asking, and there was something deeply satisfying about a world where the data simply told the truth. I was 4 months into the job when my supervisor, a compact, silver-haired woman named Patricia, who had the energy of someone who drank coffee intravenously, dropped a new referral file on my desk. Phoenix cluster, she said. State AG's office flagged it. Local health department has been tracking a spike in respiratory cases and contact dermatitis in 2 residential neighborhoods near a commercial strip. They think it's chemical exposure, but they haven't pinned the source. I want you to do the initial compliance review on the commercial properties in the zone. What kind of commercial strip? I asked. Mix of businesses. 3 restaurants, a laundromat, a dry goods store, and a nail salon chain with 2 locations side by side. The property records show the same company owns the whole block of units. I opened the file. There was a business name on the second page. Lux Nail and Spa. I read it twice, then a third time. Something wrong? Patricia asked. No, I said carefully. Give me a day with the file, and I'll come back to you. I sat with that folder for 4 hours. I pulled every public record I could find. Business licenses, property filings, supplier invoices from EPA reporting databases. Lux Nail and Spa had been using a particular brand of solvent for their acrylic removal process, a formulation that contained high concentrations of methyl methacrylate and trace levels of toluene. The manufacturer had issued a handling bulletin 2 years earlier requiring commercial users to use closed-loop disposal or certified hazmat contractors. Instead, what the state's inspector notes described were floor drains. Floor drains that connected to a common commercial wastewater line that had not been inspected in 11 years. The addresses in the file were 2 of Daniel's newest locations. The ones my parents had been bragging about in every family group chat message for the past year and a half. I closed the folder. I opened it again. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about the last family dinner I had attended, Easter 2 years ago. My brother standing at the head of the table talking about expanding to 8 locations. My father nodding like he was watching someone walk on water. My mother refilling glasses and saying, "This boy is going to build an empire." I thought about how I had sat at the far end of the table with a glass of wine and said nothing, because what was there to say? I thought about the neighborhoods on the referral map. 2 adjacent zip codes, mostly working-class families, a lot of young children in the school enrollment data. The health complaints in the file included a 7-year-old with persistent nosebleeds, a teacher who had developed occupational asthma that her pulmonologist could not explain, a retired couple whose well water had started smelling chemical the previous spring. I went to Patricia's office and knocked on the open door. "I need to make a disclosure," I said. She looked up. "I have a personal connection to one of the properties in the Phoenix file." She put her pen down. "What kind of connection?" "My parents own the nail salon chain. My brother manages operations." She was quiet for a moment. "How close are you to them?" I laughed once, short, and without much humor. "We don't talk much, but it's still a conflict." "It is," she agreed. "You're off the case as lead. I'll take over the regulatory filings and client-facing work, but I'm going to ask you something separately." She folded her hands. "Based on what you've seen in that file so far, how serious is it?" I thought about the 7-year-old, about the teacher's lungs, about 11 years of uninspected floor drains. "Serious enough that someone needs to move quickly," I said. She nodded once. "Then, let me do my job. You do yours by staying completely recused and documenting this conversation. I went back to my desk. I sat there for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. My mother answered on the third ring, surprised. Maya? It's a Tuesday. I know. I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. You're scaring me. Has anyone from a health department or environmental agency contacted you about the Camelback locations? Any complaints from neighbors? Any notices in the mail about drainage or waste disposal? There was a pause, the kind of pause that is doing a lot of work. There were some letters, she said finally. A few months ago. Your father thought it was just one of those routine things. Daniel said his attorney looked at it, and it was nothing to worry about. My stomach dropped. Mom, it's not nothing. There are people in those neighborhoods who are sick, children. And the complaints are being traced to chemical runoff from commercial properties in that strip. You need to shut down those 2 locations, and you need to call an environmental compliance attorney. Not a real estate attorney. An environmental one. Another pause. Longer. Then, how do you know this? Because I work in environmental law, and a referral file landed on my desk. I disclosed the connection immediately, and I'm off the case. But I'm calling you as your daughter, because you need to hear this before it becomes something bigger. Her voice shifted. Got smaller. Does this mean we're in trouble? Yes. But it's the kind of trouble you can still get ahead of if you move now. I kept my tone even. Not cold, not warm. Professional. The voice I had learned to use in depositions when I needed someone to listen instead of react. Call an attorney today. Not tomorrow. Today. She said she would. She did not mention the bar admission. She did not ask how I was doing or how Denver was treating me. When we hung up, I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction, not grief exactly. Just the strange stillness that comes after you do the right thing and discover it does not feel the way movies promise it will. My parents did not call an attorney that day. They called Daniel. I know this because 2 days later, my brother left me a voicemail in a tone I recognized from every childhood argument we had ever had. The tone he used when he believed being louder was the same thing as being right. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said, but this is not your business. I have attorneys handling this. We passed our last inspection. You're just looking for a reason to come after us. You've always had a problem with this family's success. He did not say it in those words exactly, but that was the architecture of it. I did not call back. Patricia filed the referral to the state environmental agency the same week, supported by the existing health department data and the compliance records she had pulled. The agency sent inspectors to both Camelback locations within 10 days. What they found was consistent with what the documents had suggested. Floor drain discharge into a shared commercial line. Improper storage of chemical waste in unsealed containers. No evidence of certified disposal contracts for the past 3 years, despite the manufacturer's requirements. The thing about environmental violations is that they do not wait for family dynamics to sort themselves out. The inspector reports went to the Enforcement Division. The Enforcement Division sent notice of violation letters. The notice of violation letters triggered a timeline that my brother's real estate attorney had absolutely no framework to navigate. Daniel posted a video. Of course he did. It was filmed in the salon with soft lighting and carefully placed orchids in the background. He wore his business clothes and spoke directly into the camera with the practiced confidence of someone who had spent years being told his instincts were always right. He said the complaints were coming from competitors. He said his salons had always maintained high standards. He said his family had built this business from nothing, and they were not going to let anyone tear it down. The video got thousands of views. The comments were full of heart emojis and "Stay strong, King." I watched it from my apartment in Denver, with a cup of tea going cold on the table beside me. My mother sent an email 2 weeks after my call. I had almost forgotten I was waiting for one. The subject line was family dinner. She wrote that she thought it might be good for all of us to get together, that things had been tense, that family was family no matter what. She mentioned that Daniel was hosting a client appreciation event at the flagship Phoenix location the following month, and that local news would be there, and wouldn't it be nice if I came, showed some support, let people see that the Torres family was united and strong. I read the email 3 times. Then I read it once more, looking specifically for the phrase "we should have listened to you," or "we're worried about the families who got sick," or even a simple "we're sorry we missed your bar admission." None of those phrases were present. What was present was the word optics. Part of me wanted to delete it and go for a run, and not think about Phoenix for another 3 months. But I had spent enough years choosing the path of least resistance in my family to recognize the specific texture of that impulse. And I had learned, slowly, and at some cost, that the path of least resistance in my family was not actually peaceful. It was just quieter. The harm was still happening. I had just stopped being able to hear it from where I was standing. I wrote back that I would come. The drive from the airport to the flagship salon felt like descending into a past I had spent 2 years climbing out of. Same dry heat, same wide streets, same smell of the desert in late afternoon. The flagship salon was on a commercial block my parents had been proud of for years, glass-fronted and freshly painted, with a new sign above the door in rose gold and cream. There were folding tables outside with branded tablecloths, a photographer walking around with a professional camera, and a small crowd of clients, local business owners, a few people I recognized as city council staffers. My brother saw me from across the courtyard and crossed to meet me with his arms already open, the performance of warmth flawless and immediate. "Maya made it," he announced to no one in particular, loud enough that several heads turned. He pulled me into a side hug that lasted exactly long enough to look genuine. "See? Family." My mother appeared behind him, squeezing my arm, whispering, "Just smile. This is important. Let us have this one." "The families who got sick deserve to have something too," I said quietly. Her expression shifted. "You sound like a stranger." "I sound like an attorney," I said. "I've been trying to sound like one to you for months." The event went on around us like a commercial for a version of my family that did not exist. My brother gave a small speech about resilience and community. There were trays of food and sparkling water with cucumber slices, and a slideshow of the salon's history on a screen mounted near the entrance. I stood near the back with my arms crossed and watched my parents beam. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia's paralegal. A single line. "State enforcement just served formal orders. All 3 connected locations suspended pending remediation. Effective today." I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket. It took about 7 minutes for the news van to pull up. Not because of any drama I had arranged. They were already coming. The enforcement orders were public record, the moment they were filed. A local environmental reporter had been following the health cluster story for 3 weeks. The reporter was a young woman in a gray blazer who walked directly toward the salon entrance with a camera operator behind her and a folder of printouts under her arm. She asked to speak with the business owner. My brother stepped forward with his professional smile already deployed. The interview lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, his smile had stopped working. The formal enforcement orders required immediate suspension of operations, mandatory remediation of the drainage systems, an independent environmental audit, and a community health assessment of the 2 affected residential areas. The financial penalties in the first notice alone were enough to require liquidating assets. There would be more notices. There always were. My mother came to find me near the edge of the courtyard. Her face had done something I had never quite seen it do before. Not anger. Something closer to a person finally seeing the actual size of what they have been standing next to for years. "You knew this was coming today," she said. "I knew the orders had been filed. I didn't know the timing. You could have warned us." I looked at her carefully. "I warned you 6 weeks ago. I called you on a Tuesday and told you to hire an environmental attorney and move quickly. You called Daniel instead." She looked away. Across the courtyard, my brother was talking to someone in a suit, his hands moving fast and urgent. My father stood near the entrance with his arms crossed, watching the camera operator pan across the front of the building. "Those families in the neighborhood," I said, "the ones with the sick kids and the contaminated well water. They didn't get a warning call. They just woke up one day, and their water smelled wrong, and their kid couldn't breathe through a full night." That's the thing I keep coming back to. My mother was quiet for a long time. Around us, the client appreciation event was dissolving, guests drifting toward their cars, the photographer quietly packing up his equipment. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said finally. "I know you didn't. But you had the chance to find out. And you chose not to." She did not have an answer for that. Neither did the space between us. The fallout moved at the speed that legal and regulatory processes actually move, which is slower than drama but faster than denial can outrun. The state environmental agency's findings made the local news first, then got picked up by a regional outlet that ran a longer piece connecting the chemical exposure data to the health complaints that had been accumulating for 2 years in those neighborhoods. My brother gave 2 more interviews in which he used the word unfair, 11 times by my count. A class action was filed by a residents' association on behalf of 14 families. The civil liability exposure was significant enough that the family's business insurance carrier sent a coverage dispute letter within the first month. Daniel lost his partnership deal with a national salon supply company that had been in negotiation for most of the year. My parents had to close the 2 Camelback locations permanently and enter into a consent agreement with the state that required funding a portion of the neighborhood remediation costs. The flagship location stayed open, barely, under a restructured compliance plan that cost more per quarter than it brought in. I was not involved in any of the enforcement proceedings. Patricia had handled everything cleanly and by the book. But because I had been the first to identify the connection and flag it internally before any formal process began, and because I had documented every conversation and disclosure properly, I qualified for consideration under the state's Environmental Whistleblower Protection Statute. There was no dramatic ceremony. There was an email from a law clerk, and then a direct deposit that arrived on a Wednesday morning while I was eating oatmeal and reading a brief. I sat at my kitchen table for a while after I saw the number. I had spent so many years in my family feeling like my choices were decorative, like my degree and my bar exam and my career were things they acknowledged the way you acknowledge a houseplant, politely and without real attention. The number in my bank account that morning was the clearest evidence the world had ever offered me that I had been wrong to take their measure of me seriously. I spent some of it on practical things. Paid off the last of my student loans in one payment, which felt less triumphant and more like setting down something heavy I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten it wasn't part of my body. I paid 3 months ahead on my rent. I booked a solo trip to Costa Rica that I had been looking at online for 2 years and never let myself actually click confirm on. I came back from that trip with a sunburn and a clearer head than I had experienced in years, and I did what I had been thinking about on every trail and every beach and every quiet morning with coffee on a porch overlooking the jungle. I incorporated a nonprofit. I called it the Clean Air, Clear Rights Project. The mission was straightforward: free legal resources and environmental compliance education for workers in the salon, spa, and personal care industry who worked with chemical products daily but had no formal safety training and no idea they had the right to report violations without losing their jobs. Nail technicians, estheticians, salon workers, most of them immigrants or women in low-wage positions, most of them breathing in solvents and adhesives for 40 hours a week, in spaces with inadequate ventilation, because no one had ever told them they could ask for better. The irony of it was not lost on me. The industry that had put my family's name on a building and my brother's face on a promotional calendar was now funding a project to protect the exact workers my family had never adequately protected. We partnered with a community health clinic in Phoenix that had been tracking the original illness cluster. We ran our first workshop in that neighborhood on a Saturday morning in February. 12 people came. A technician named Rosa, who had been having migraines for 2 years and had never connected them to her workplace exposure, sat in the front row and took notes on everything. She came back the following month. She brought 4 colleagues. By the end of the first year, we had held workshops in 3 states and helped 9 workers file anonymous complaints with state labor and environmental boards. My parents called a few times. My mother's messages were the kind of messages that wanted resolution without accountability, the kind that say "I miss you" without saying "I understand what happened." My father left a voicemail that I listened to twice, and then set the phone face down on the table and went to cook dinner. He said I had always had something to prove. He said I had used my education as a weapon against this family. He said he hoped I was satisfied. I thought about writing back that satisfaction had nothing to do with it. That a 7-year-old's nosebleeds had nothing to do with the bar admission they missed. That I had not made choices out of spite, but out of the very simple logic that when people are being harmed and you have the professional training to help stop it, you do not get to pause that obligation because the people causing the harm share your last name. I did not write that. What I wrote, months later, in a short email, was this. I did not do what I did to hurt you. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I could not look at those families and pretend I had not seen what I saw. I hope you are well. I am open to a conversation that starts with honesty. I am not open to one that asks me to act like none of this happened. I did not hear back. And here is what I want you to understand about that silence, because this is the part of these stories that usually gets skipped over in favor of the dramatic moments. The silence did not feel like punishment. It did not feel like loss, not the way I expected. It felt like the end of a long wait for something that was never going to come anyway. When you have been waiting for someone to see you clearly for most of your life, the moment you stop waiting is not emptiness. It is space. And space, it turns out, is something you can actually build in. My work is the same every day. I go into the office. I read files. I write briefs. I sit in conference calls with regulators and scientists, and sometimes with frightened workers who do not know yet that they have rights. I do not go home to a family that brags about me at dinner tables. I go home to an apartment I chose, in a city I chose, with a life that is measurably mine, in a way that nothing in my childhood ever was. At the last workshop we held, a young woman who had been doing nail enhancements for 3 years told me that she had always assumed the headaches and the throat irritation were just part of the job. She thought it was the price you paid for the work. I told her it was not. I told her she was allowed to ask for proper ventilation, for chemical data sheets, for disposal protocols, for all the basic protections that employers were legally required to provide and rarely volunteered. She looked at me like I had said something revolutionary. It was not revolutionary. It was just the truth, delivered clearly, to someone who had never been given the chance to hear it before. I think about that a lot. How much harm gets done not out of malice, but out of the decision that some people are not worth the effort of informing. How many people are still sitting in rooms with inadequate ventilation, in families with inadequate honesty, in jobs and relationships where they have been taught to accept less than they deserve because no one ever handed them the document that said they had the right to something better. If you are listening to this, and you are the person in your family who gets the smaller portion of everything, the applause and the presence and the recognition, and you have been told so many times that your reaction is the problem rather than the pattern, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too sensitive. You are not dramatic. You are not ungrateful for needing the people who are supposed to love you to actually show up. Your worth does not depend on whether they see it. Your achievements do not become smaller because they missed them. The degree, the bar exam, the promotion, the thing you worked for while they were busy celebrating someone else, those things are yours. Fully and completely yours. And if you ever find yourself sitting on information that could protect other people while also inconveniencing the family that never came to your ceremony, I hope you remember this. The people who benefit from your silence will always have a reason it needs to continue. Speak anyway. Someone else's clean air might depend on it. And yes, so might yours. If you were in my position, would you have made that call? Would you have gone to that ribbon cutting? Knowing what you knew? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who's listening.